Remember, this is a team in a rebuilding season, and this is only their second season. Let's remember that, Flores and Greer did not come in and saying, we're going to be winners in year two. They said this is a 3-4 year deal, and we're just finishing year one.
What's going on, guys? Thanks so much for stopping by. Hopefully you're having a good day so far and preparing for an awesome weekend. We've got a really special video planned for you guys today. Let you know just a couple of days ago in that update that I've got a special guest coming on to the show, and we've got him on today. I've just met him and became acquainted with him, and we've been talking a lot about the Dolphins. He agreed to come on the show, and so I want to introduce you guys to Todd Delker. Todd, thanks a lot for coming on. How you doing?
Thanks for having me, man. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the draft ending for the Dolphins, I think that's kind of what's freshest in everybody's mind. So I'd like to kind of just get your overall thoughts on the draft. How do you think the Dolphins did?
I don't think they did very well, to be honest with you. I rated the Dolphins draft. I don't like to give grades for these things right after the draft because you can't really tell until after a few years when these guys have panned out and played. But based solely on the selections, I gave them like a C-. I don't think they did a very good job addressing what was the greatest need on that team, which was offensive linemen. I think it was a draft stocked with good offensive linemen, and the Dolphins had 5 picks in the first round and walked away with what I had as the 6th or 7th best offensive lineman on the board. So all in all, I don't think they did very well. I liked the second day 2, day 3 a lot better than day 1. But I think in today's NFL, when you're drafting and you have 3 picks in the first round, you're expecting all 3 of those picks to be not just impact players, but guys to come in and impact your team in a positive way right off the bat. And I don't know that the Dolphins did that.
Sure. Yeah. I agree with that. I gave them a little bit higher of a grade than you did. I gave them a C+ for the draft. I do think that they did some addressing of key needs later in the draft. I really did like day 3 a lot. That was the best day, in my opinion, that we had. If they had not gotten some steals later in the draft, guys like Curtis Weaver, I probably would have had a lower grade with them as well. But as it stands, I think they did okay. I agree with you there. I don't think it was anything special. Disappointing, I think underwhelming is a really good word to use for it, because this had the potential to be a really amazing draft with all the picks that we had, and I just really think we kind of fell short. How do you feel about Tua at number 5? Do you think it's a stretch? Do you think it's too much of a reach with all the injury concerns?
Well, yeah, I have you had a lot of questions there, and so yes, let me try to break them down and answer each question. First of all, I would say this to your viewers or your listeners: they need to know I am not one of those guys that feel like the Dolphins had to come away with a quarterback in this draft. I think that's a misnomer. I think that's a wrong theological approach. I think that. And I'm not saying that Fitzpatrick or Rosen is the answer. What I'm saying is year to year, there are good quarterbacks who almost always come out of the draft, and you have a number of stories where guys are taken later in the draft who wind up being top-tier quarterbacks. So to say that the Dolphins simply had to take a quarterback, whether it was Tua or Herbert or maybe Fromm or Hurts, we heard that rumor that they were going to take him at 18 or those kind of things. I don't know that I agree with that approach. So with that thought, and like I said, your viewers and your listeners should know that about me. When they took Tua with the 5th pick, I think the Dolphins, kind of handcuffed themselves with the 18th pick when they took Jackson, which I thought was a terrible pick. But getting back to your question about Tua, I think Tua is an exceptional football player. I think he's a great quarterback, and I don't like to throw the word great around a lot. At the collegiate level, he was exceptional. You're talking about a guy who throws darts. I mean, he's one of the most, if not the most accurate passer I've seen coming out of college in a long, long time. He's a proven winner, and he's done it more than 1 year, and he's done it on a great team against premier talent. And he's a good kid. He's easy to like. So there's really nothing to dislike about Tua from any standpoint. The problem is, of course, what everybody recognizes as the problem is this: he's injury prone, and that's not debatable. He is absolutely an injury risk, and he's established that throughout his college career. So the issue then becomes, you asked me, how did I like the pick of Tua at 5? I think it's too big of a risk for a top 5 pick. Like I said, when you're drafting in the NFL in the first round, in and of itself, you want these guys to be impact players right off the bat. You cannot miss in the NFL in the first round. Not in today's NFL. You just can't miss that. And there's just too big of a risk at number 5 to take with a guy like Tua, who, could potentially in his first start can get hit by the blind side behind an offensive line that isn't that great, and his career is over. And now you just signed him to a big contract and $20 million guaranteed money. And if he goes out in his first game, remember Raekwon McMillan a few years back in his first preseason game on a kickoff on a special teams play, blew his knee and missed the whole year. So you think about, if Tua gets hit in a preseason game and he's gone, you have just risked your future with that top 5 pick. So to me, I love Tua. I think he's a great quarterback. I hope this works out for the Dolphins. I think there's tremendous potential if he can stay healthy. But I think the risk is too great at number 5. And so because of that, I didn't like the pick.
Yeah, and I like your take there. I definitely agree. The injury concern is huge. It's the biggest concern with Tua. Clearly a very talented quarterback, hopefully talented in the NFL, and is able to stay on the field. But like you said, you really never know. A preseason, even a practice, something small could wind up resulting in potentially career ending. You're looking at a guy who is very, very fragile. So I like your take on that.
I mean, look at Ryan Tannehill. When he re-injured his knee the second time, he did it untouched. He did it in a practice, in a scrimmage, running a play off the sidelines. I mean, in today's NFL, you don't have to get hit to be out. And again, there are other intangibles to Tua that are maybe not. They're not as big a deal as maybe they were at one time. But you're talking about a guy who's also left-handed. And you're talking about a guy who's, on the short side. And I get that there are examples of shorter guys who've succeeded, but they're the exception. They're not the norm. And it seems to be becoming more of a normal thing. And so I think that made the Dolphins a little more settled with picking Tua. They clearly liked him. Chris Greer was clearly a fan of Tua. And, again, just not to reiterate a point, but at 5, for me, it's just too risky when you factor in all of those intangibles. At 18, yeah, I might have taken a shot with him. Or at 30, for sure, I think I would have taken a shot with him. He's too big a talent to not take that chance. But at number 5, for me, if I had been the Dolphins in drafting, I would have done one or two things. I would have taken Isaiah Simmons, who was on the board at that time, because I thought he was the best player in the draft. And if not him, I might have traded out of that pick and traded down a few spots to potentially take 2 of those top-tier offensive linemen. Or I may have taken one of the offensive linemen that they liked there at 5 and then traded the other 2 picks to move up and take another one. That's probably the route I would have taken.
Yeah, and right now we're looking at an offensive line last year that gave up 56 sacks total. It's a bad situation for any quarterback, and it would be a moot point if the Dolphins had done a lot to address those concerns. But over the course of this offseason period, they just really haven't done a ton. They haven't done a lot in free agency. Eric Flowers certainly isn't going to be the savior of this offensive line. Neither is Ted Karras, and our draft is full of guys who are rookies. So Tua behind an offensive line that is going to give up a lot of sacks, that was one of the higher penalized offensive lines in the league as well. It's a dangerous situation, which brings me to Austin Jackson. A lot of people think that might be a really nice piece that we picked up who could benefit this team for a long time in the future. What are your feelings?
Well, I think they're right. He might be that. He very well may be that. There's a lot of upside to Austin Jackson, and I think if of every player that the Dolphins drafted, this is the guy I've gone back and analyzed by far the most. You didn't have to do a lot of analysis on Tua because you knew what you got with the guy. If he's healthy, it's a win. But with this guy, there's so many intangibles. One, he's very young. He's one of the younger players in the draft. All indicators are he's a good guy. He's one of those good quality human beings. He's a tall guy. He's lean. He's athletic, which you look for, but he's raw. The upside on him is that all of the negatives that everyone assesses with Austin Jackson are all teachable things. They're mechanics or technical things. No one questions his skill set. No one questions his athleticism. I think of all the offensive line in the draft that I saw, he gets to the second level better than any of them. And when he gets to the linebacker, the game is over. He wins that battle. The problem is that he is so raw that when he goes up against elite talent, elite pass rushers, he absolutely struggles. And the one game that I analyzed far and away the most was the Sun Bowl against Iowa, where A.J. Epineza just kind of, it's unfair to say that he had his way with him, but he created havoc that whole game. He had 2 sacks. He had a forced fumble on the quarterback. And so here's A.J. Epineza, who is, I think, one of the top 20 players in this draft, but I don't know that he's just this elite pass rusher in the NFL. I don't know that he isn't, but he really, when the game was on the line, when it was 3rd and 10 passing situations, he was able to consistently beat Austin Jackson. And that's a problem for me when you take this guy with the 18th pick, and he's the guy that you are expecting to potentially build this offensive line around. And so how good is he going to be? You're talking about a guy who struggled against elite talent at college. Yes, it was a big school, a major program. But now you're going to bring him into the NFL, and let's not forget who drafted Epineza. The guy who gave him a hard time is in the division. And so he's going to be going up against a guy who had his way twice. So to me, yes, there's upside. There is upside. To me, Austin Jackson was, I think I had him the 6th or the 7th rated offensive lineman in this draft class. With that 18 pick, they had to take an offensive lineman. They pretty much had to. I already said I don't agree that they had to take a quarterback this draft, but when they did, now they have to protect that investment. And I think as they were watching the tackles, when people like Wills and Wirfs and Becton, when all these guys started going off the board, I can see Brian Flores and Chris Greer in my mind just pounding the table, hoping one of those guys was going to fall to 18. And it did not happen. And I don't know. I haven't heard any reports that they tried to move up to get one of those guys. I don't know whether they did or didn't, but I know that I would have. And so here they were at 18. And for them, the best tackle on the board was Austin Jackson. I had the kid from Houston, Jones, rated a little bit higher than Jackson. But again, they were forced to take a project with that pick. And I think that is a direct result of them taking Tua with that number 5 pick.
Sure. Yeah, Jackson is definitely a low floor, high ceiling guy. He is the epitome of that. He's got tons of potential, but a low floor for the NFL. Good in college, but one of those guys that's definitely going to need the progression. And to play devil's advocate, I do feel like there could be a scenario where Tua's out this year, recovering from injury. Ryan Fitzpatrick or Josh Rosen are in doing their thing, and Austin Jackson has the year to kind of catch up to the NFL and learn as much as he can. That way when Tua comes back in, he's ready to play. And, I think maybe there could be a scenario where that works out. But like you said, at 18, they could have easily, with all the picks that they had, moved up to get one of the premier offensive linemen that are in the draft. And it's not a stretch. It's not like they're trying to move up from 32 all the way up to 10. They could have slid up a couple of spots and secured their guy, even up to 13, where Tampa Bay wound up moving to get Tristan Wirfs, who I had rated as the 2nd best offensive lineman in the draft.
So did I. In fact, I agree with every word you just said. Again, it comes down to this idea that the Dolphins obviously they felt they had to get a quarterback in this draft. The biggest problem, if you want to say, where did the Dolphins go wrong in the draft, I would say this to you. I would say that in a draft that was where the strongest position in this draft was offensive line, maybe wide receiver, but I think the offensive line was better when you talk about premier talent, which is why, you had 5-6 guys go in the first round. I mean, we haven't seen anything like that in a long time. So in a draft where you had that quality was the position that you needed most. I mean, almost everybody says the Dolphins needed offensive line was their top need. So they come into a draft that has offensive linemen galore, talented offensive linemen. They have 5 picks in the first 2 rounds, and they walk away with Austin Jackson. To me, that's an epic fail. To me, that's a horrible, horrible move. In the top 5 picks, your biggest need was offensive line, and you walked away with the 6th or 7th best guy on that board. That, to me, is not good.
Yeah, I agree with that. I totally agree. I think there were too many opportunities for the Dolphins that they could have taken advantage of that they didn't. Like I said earlier, I think as we progressed throughout the days of the draft, I think we did get stronger. The first round was rough. To me, second got better, and the third was our strongest. So, keeping the draft that we've been talking about and also free agency in mind, what kind of season do you see Miami potentially having? Any type of record prediction?
Well, the Dolphins. Boy, that's a long answer to a short question. Just to give you the flat, I see them winning 6 games this year. If they won 7, I wouldn't be floored, and if they won 5, I wouldn't be floored. I think Flores is establishing himself as an absolute amazing, motivating coach. He had one of the worst semblances of talent that I've seen on an NFL roster last year win 5 of their last 9 games. That team plays hard, especially towards the end of the season. And let's not forget that 2 of those 9 teams were New England and Philadelphia. And no one anticipated this team beating either of those 2 teams, and yet they did. And the game against Philadelphia was kind of a comeback win, and the game against New England was a comeback win. So this team was learning how to win, playing hard for Flores. And so what do I see him winning? I think that free agency, to move from the draft to free agency, I think they did well. I think they should have done things differently, but I think they did well. They certainly addressed the defense as the priority. They locked up a lot of money in the defensive backfield, which I think is a risk because it's an injury-prone position. You see it happen all the time. And if I'm not mistaken, I did the math a little bit earlier, talking about this. The Dolphins have something like $32 million per year locked into 2 positions at cornerback with Byron Jones and Xavier Howard. They're the top 2 highest paid defensive backs in the NFL.
Yep.
And so when you're locking up that kind of money, and then to draft Igbenogany with the last pick in the first round, it begs some questions. And so getting back to your question, which was, what do I think? I think that the offensive line got better. There's no doubt about that. It did get better. Bringing in Flowers, bringing in Karras improves the offensive lineman. But it only improves the offensive line because it was really bad last year. Nobody was, it's not like there was this race to sign Flowers or Karras by the NFL. These were 2 guys the Dolphins targeted and got them because they weren't in high demand. I think there's some question marks here too. Let's look at, say, Flowers, for example. You're talking about a guy who's on his 4th team in 5 years. Now, that being said, he did have his best season last year, and that's good, and he did play well, but he was also surrounded by better players than he's going to be surrounded by now. Let's assume Jackson starts at left tackle, so he's got a rookie who's never played before in the NFL starting on his left side, and we'll assume that Ted Karras is going to start at center, who was a backup player for the New England Patriots until their starting center went down in injury. And with Karras, you're talking about a guy who also last year was surrounded by very good time. He had Joe Tooney on one side and Shaq Mason on the other. So, so Karras doesn't have that foundation surrounding him that he did in New England, and Flowers doesn't have that foundation surrounding him that he did in Washington. So when you think about that, did the offensive line get better? Well, sure it did. It got better because there was no way it couldn't get better. But now you're talking about a rookie left tackle who struggled against elite talent at college. You're talking about a journeyman in Eric Flowers who he had a good season last year, but Pro Football Force has him ranked middle of the pack. I think he's ranked 19 out of 39, something like that. And I think that's right. I think that's about where he is. Now you've got a guy named Karras who was a depth guy for New England, forced into a starting position, who held his own, and he did well, but also surrounded by good talent. So now you look at the right side of this line, and you're looking at potentially two more rookies, potentially in the young kid that they took out of Georgia, whose name is Solomon
Kinley.
We're talking about him, and I actually liked him. I think he was a good pickup in a late round, or Robert Hunt, who is one of those guys, can play tackle but projected at guard. Because if you're not starting them, you're now looking at Michael Dieter, who was underwhelming last year as a rookie, or Jesse Davis, who was literally one of the lowest rated tackles in the NFL last year. So did the line get better? Yeah, it got better. Did it get a lot better? No, I don't think it did. And I think that's where the Dolphins, to me, really erred in free agency. Let me ask you a question while we're doing this,
Sure.
because I'd like your take on it as well. You know, a guy I thought, and something I thought the Dolphins would do in free agency was go after an offensive lineman. You had Brandon Scherf. Now, I know that he was franchised, if I'm not mistaken. But then you have a guy I really liked was Jack Conklin out of Tennessee. And here's a guy who's a right tackle who has battled a couple injuries, no doubt about it, but, you know, was an all-pro as a rookie, kind of came back to form last season, didn't sign a huge deal, right? I mean, he signed a deal that's similar to Flowers did. I mean, it has a little more guaranteed money, but I think they both signed 3 or 4 years at roughly $10 or $11 million a year. In any event, here's a guy who's a right tackle. Now, fast forward to where you draft Tua, whose blind spot is going to be the right tackle. If you had signed Conklin instead of, say, Byron Jones, which cost you a whole lot more money, right? I mean, Byron Jones cost the team $82 million over 5 years, whereas Conklin would have cost them $40 million over, say, 4, something along those lines, right in that ballpark. If you had signed Conklin, you now have your quarterback's weak side protected with a young, talented guy who could potentially be on that team for a long time. You drafted Igbenogany in the first round, so if you don't change anything in your first round, this draft looks a whole lot better if they make the move for Conklin over Byron Jones. Because now you have Conklin, who's solid, who's one of the better tackles on your team, protecting your quarterback's left side. Now you have Karras and you have Flowers, and you have a better foundation simply by the addition of Conklin. And you can take Igbenogany, and granted, he's a rookie, but he's a strong candidate to be a solid starter in the NFL. I mean, he's a very good athletic corner. He's good size. He's good speed. He's got everything you want. You have him starting on the opposite side of Xavier Howard. You don't have Byron Jones. There's no doubt about that. But you save that salary. You still address both of those positions. I think you're a better team if the Dolphins had done a better job in free agency and spent just a little bit of money on a top-tier offensive lineman rather than spending all that money on the defense.
Yeah, and I think our defense is the strongest part of the team, and that was last year as well. So I would have liked to see a lot more improvement focused on the offensive side of the ball, especially with the line. And I put out a lot of videos on my channel in the free agency period, and one guy that I was absolutely banging the table about was Jack Conklin. I wanted him on the team so badly. And like you said, it was especially because of the projections of Tua to Miami. You want
Absolutely.
someone who's going to be strong protecting your quarterback's weak side.
Right.
Conklin's such a good player. You know, like you said, injuries, yes, but he's shown that he can do it at the pro level.
Yeah. And he's inexpensive. He doesn't cost a lot of money, you know, so and it changes if you did that. Like I said, it changes this draft because now Tua, you're not as worried about him because you have somebody who can protect him. Jackson as a project becomes a more easily understood project because you already have a better offensive line for him to work in. And then the drafting of Igbenogany at pick number 30 makes sense to address your other starting cornerback position that is not going to cost you what it costs you now. And so I think that if they had done some things a little bit different, now listen, we're just speculating, and these guys know more than we do. There's a reason that we're not general managers of football teams. The one thing I would add to this is that what is clear to me is that Chris Greer and Brian Flores in particular are drafting a certain type, or they're trying to build this team around a certain type of player. And we saw, and this is clearly something that Flores brings with him from Belichick's idea. Remember, Bill Belichick has taken marginal players, people like Eric Flowers, people like Austin Jackson, and turned them into really good football players on his team. But there's also a history of Bill Belichick coached players going to other teams as free agents and not doing as well. So I think we're seeing the Dolphins try to build that same kind of mindset within this organization that they got in New England, where there's a certain type of player, a hard worker, a guy who does his job, doesn't complain, a good guy, a character guy, a locker room guy. And all indicators are that everybody they drafted is that. Even Austin Jackson. I mean, that's one of the positives about this guy. That's one of the things that everybody likes is that he seems to be a pretty good guy. And so that's great, but we're talking about a guy who we want to have a little bit of an edge to him. You know what I mean? And so the Dolphins are targeting types of players, not just talent. And I think there is something good to be said for that.
Yeah, the correlation of what Brian Flores is trying to do in Miami and New England is absolutely there. It's a very parallel type of thing that he's trying to recreate in Miami. It could work out. It could fall flat. Yeah, we've seen Bill Belichick clone type guys, the Matt Patricias of the NFL, who try to do it. Doesn't work out, but I definitely see Brian Flores as being a different type of coach. I definitely have a lot more faith in him than I do for a guy like Matt Patricia. So moving on from the draft, let's talk about just the players to look out for. If you're the casual fan just watching the Dolphins, who is somebody that's going to stand out for the Dolphins this coming season?
You know what? There's two guys on this team that I'm pretty excited about. And, to add to what you just said, let's make no mistake. We're being a little critical of the Dolphins, but that's what we're doing, right? I mean, that's the whole point of this conversation. I think the Dolphins are moving in the right direction. I think Chris Greer is a good GM, and I think Brian Flores is a good coach. And I think that for the first time in a long time, there's genuine excitement about the future of this football team. And that there's something to be said for that. So even though we're being hyper analytical of these selections and of these picks, it's worth mentioning that all of these picks could work out. Everybody they drafted could be great, and we won't be bemoaning the losses of Minkah Fitzpatrick and Laramie Tunsil in 2 years if guys like Brandon Jones, the safety they got from Texas, and Austin Jackson turn out to be just as good. Is that likely? Probably not. But we still don't know. And so what I'm saying is there's a lot of reason to have faith in what the Dolphins are doing, and I do. So I'm excited about it. But to answer your question, two guys I'm most excited about, I think Jerome Baker is one of the best defensive players in the NFL right now.
Absolutely.
I think that. And when you look at the Dolphins acquisitions, they certainly address the defensive line, bringing in guys like Shaq Lawson and Emmanuel Ogba, and they, guys like Kyle Van Noy. When they did these things, and you're going to have a guy like Christian Wilkins coming into his second season who knows a little bit about what he's up against. Godchow had, I thought, a little bit of a down year last year, but 2 years ago he was an excellent defensive tackle, nose tackle, however you want to position him, whatever scheme you're working. I think the defensive line got a lot better, and because of that, it's going to free up your linebackers, especially in this system. And a guy like Jerome Baker is fast enough to spy on a quarterback, fast enough to cover most tight ends, if not all tight ends in the NFL, and he'll ring your bell regardless of how big of a running back you are. So I love Jerome Baker. I think you're talking about a future, hear me, I think you're talking about a future defensive NFL MVP. I think he's that good. I think it is the single best draft that Chris Greer has made to get this guy in the second round. I was a big fan of him in college. I liked him better than Raekwon McMillan. I think he's better in the pros. And I just think he's a budding superstar, and we're happy to have him. He's also a leader. He's a good character guy. He's a positive locker room guy. I just like everything about him. There's really nothing about him I don't like. The next guy on the offensive side of things is Matt Breida, a guy who made, to me, the draft palatable, because you got him for nothing. Remember, Matt Breida wasn't drafted. He's he signed as an unsigned free agent, and just boom, came into the right scenario there in San Francisco. He's a fast guy. He's a shifty guy. He had something to prove, and he did. And the Dolphins got him for a fifth-round pick. And I think if I'm Matt Breida, I look at that, and that causes more of a chip on my shoulder. Like, man, that's all I was worth, a fifth-round pick? I'm going to show these guys. And he comes into a backfield with Jordan Howard, who is another guy who doesn't get a lot of hype that I think is better than people anticipate. I was looking at some of the statistics of Jordan Howard when they first got him, and he's got some pretty impressive things to be excited about. Since 2016, he has the third most yards in the NFL at almost 4,000. That doesn't sound like a lot because he's not a touchdown guy. He's not a super fast guy. He's a trenches guy, and guys like that really clear space for guys like Breida. So I'm pretty excited about the running back situation, assuming the offensive line is able to open some holes.
Yeah, agreed. The Breida Jordan Howard 1-2 punch should be pretty nice. It reminds me a little about or of when the New York Giants were kind of pulling the same thing with Brandon Jones and Ahmad Bradshaw. It was a big, strong guy who could run you over, who's built like a linebacker almost, slow as a cow. But then when he wears down the defense enough, you bring in the short, shifty guy who's real fast, and it's just a nice compliment to have in the backfield. I like Breida a lot. That was one of my favorite picks from the draft. I consider it like a fifth round pick, but you're also spending on someone who has proven himself in the NFL, who is really good. Yeah, I like it. I really do. I like it a lot.
Yeah, and he doesn't cost anything. I think they're paying him like $3 million a year.
Right.
It's really and the same with Howard. As I recall, they signed him to a 2-year deal, and it wasn't like a astronomically high price tag for him. So the Dolphins really did improve that level of the offense. There's no doubt. I think you'd ask me who am I excited about. A guy like Devontae Parker, who I thought was really. He kind of was snubbed. I thought he had a Pro Bowl season last year. I think that, one of the things I do is, I'll spend time on Facebook and every now and again you'll see like a highlight reel of, when the Dolphins beat New England. And I mean, he just had his way with arguably the top corner in the NFL. I mean, it was just like he was unstoppable. But he did that all throughout the season. And when you look back at his numbers, it was a make or break season for him. And you got to give him his credit because he was very maligned. He had been playing injured or had injury problems his whole career. He gets to his first season where he's not injured, and he puts together a Pro Bowl type season. Now, he didn't make the Pro Bowl, but I don't count that against him. He should have. And he's another guy. And, I had a debate with a friend of mine not too long ago who was saying that the only reason he felt that Parker had the kind of year that he did is because of the emergence of Preston Williams, the kid they got out of Colorado State last year. And I said, yeah, but he got hurt like in game 6, and Parker still had his way the remainder of the season. And the supporting cast were basically journeymen, guys like Alan Hearns, who I think is a good receiver, guys like Isaiah Ford, Albert Wilson, and he still did it with behind a terrible offensive line and Ryan Fitzpatrick throwing the ball to him, and he still had these ridiculous numbers. So Devontae Parker is another guy I'm pretty excited to see what he does this season, and I'm really hoping that he stays healthy.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. There's a lot of guys to keep your eyes out, keep your eyes open for this coming season. Like you said, Devontae Parker finally kind of coming into his own, something to keep your eye on, and then the new acquisitions as well. I love Jerome Baker. So, what do you think about Josh Rosen? I know it's kind of skipping from topic to topic, but do you think that he's going to remain on the team after training camps, or do you think that he's going to be traded?
There's no way I would trade him. I can tell you that if I'm a Dolphins personnel man, if I'm a coach, Josh Rosen has a lot of value to me because of the injury risk to Tua. So, how much longer is Fitzpatrick going to be in the NFL? Maybe another season, 2 at the most. And I get he's a popular player. He's popular everywhere he goes, but he's certainly popular in South Florida. And, I think he will be the starter. I do not think they will start Tua. In fact, I think I wouldn't be surprised if this first year if Tua is even 3rd on the depth chart, even though they might view him as the 2nd-string quarterback, because you got a guy like Josh Rosen. So to me, Rosen has more value to the Dolphins than he does to anybody else. And the reason I say that is because even though there's so much upside and he's so young and he's still such a very talented guy, in the only 2 seasons where he's had to play, he's been behind 2 of the worst offensive line ever assembled. And so, did he have a fair chance to prove himself? And to me, no. But the argument to that is Fitzpatrick was behind the same line and put together a pretty decent season. But Fitzpatrick's is a savvy guy. Fitzpatrick's a guy who's been there before, who understands it. Rosen hasn't. So I feel bad for Josh Rosen because I would have liked to have seen, like I said, I would have drafted 2 offensive linemen with my first 2 picks for sure. I would have walked away with 2 of those top 5 guys, and I would have given the keys to Rosen and said, this is your make or break season. You're either going to prove to me that I need a quarterback next year or that I don't. And it's a shame he didn't get that opportunity. I think if I'm Josh Rosen, you're going to have to start looking in the mirror and saying to yourself, you know what, I might have a pretty nice career in the NFL as a backup quarterback. I might be able to redefine myself as a guy like Matt Moore, who was a pretty good quarterback. Remember, Matt Moore led us to the playoffs after Tannehill got hurt when the last time we made the playoffs, and played well. So I think that, Rosen's got to reevaluate himself, and Rosen's got some questions that he needs to answer. But I like Rosen. I think he can still potentially be a good starting quarterback in the NFL. I think he's just had two very unlucky scenarios, very unlucky situations. But, to knock against him, he didn't make the most of his situation here in Miami. He did not play well when he went in, and we can talk about why he didn't. But the fact is, Fitzpatrick went in and did. And so that hurt Rosen's take, I think, when Fitzpatrick came in and played very well. That hurt Rosen. That didn't help him. But I feel for the guy.
Yeah, I agree. He just really has had a just bad circumstances to come into in the NFL. Hasn't gotten the best opportunities at all to really kind of come into his own and be an NFL quarterback. I think a lot of it's going to depend on training camps. I would like the best quarterback in training camps, in OTAs, and all of that. I want the best quarterback on the field. I don't think Tua should play at all this first year. He needs to just spend the year, recover, learn the NFL, come in, and then he'll be okay. But I would like, between Fitzpatrick or Rosen, whoever performs the best, they need to be on the field. And I just have a feeling, I don't know, and I hope this isn't the case. I trust your word a little bit more than what I think. But, my feeling is that maybe if Rosen, again, doesn't beat out Ryan Fitzpatrick in training camps, it might be a situation where he's going to find himself somewhere else. There are rumors right now that Pittsburgh has some interest in trying to make a move for him, back up Big Ben, and then by the time Roethlisberger's done, or he gets hurt just like last year, Rosen can have a shot on a successful team who's going to put the pieces around him that he needs.
For him, I'd be happy to see that. At the same time, I'd hate to see us give Pittsburgh another first-round draft pick and watch him become, lights out for them while we're stuck with a draft pick that we hope pans out.
Right. Yep, I agree. Totally. All right, so final question here. I want to say thanks a lot for coming on. Final question. Favorite move by Miami this offseason? That's draft, free agency, trades, anything that comes to mind.
My favorite move would be the acquisition of Matt Breida for a 5th-round pick on draft day. I think it made the draft palatable. I thought that was a good decision. It was a good move. You get high return for essentially nothing. I like, there were some good things. We didn't talk a lot this time about, the 2nd and 3rd day draft picks. I think, Robert Hunt potentially could be a very good lineman. I think the same thing about Solomon Kindley. Curtis Weaver, I know a lot of people are high on this guy. I'm high on this guy. You're talking about a guy, though, who is not amazingly fast, amazingly strong. He's just a football player, and so he did it at a smaller school. So it'll be interesting to see how he translates that into the NFL. Remember, this is a team in a rebuilding season, and this is only their 2nd season. Let's remember that Flores and Greer did not come in and saying we're going to be winners in year 2. They said this is a 3-4 year deal, and we're just finishing year 1. And so like I said, there's a lot to be excited about. If all these draft picks pan out, that's going to be great. I think the defense is going to be substantially better. I think we're going to have a strong pass rush, I think. Maybe not great, but it's going to be good. I think we have where is there a better tandem of cornerbacks in the NFL? I don't know. But I would like to have seen, the Dolphins go after a guy like McKinney or Delpit to really shore up the safety position, maybe moving Bobby McCain back into the slot, which we now assume Igbenogany is going to play. Eric Rowe started to come into his own towards the latter half of the season. And so there's good depth on the defense. I'm excited to see what Christian Wilkins brings in the 2nd year, see if he has that transition year from rookie to sophomore, which a lot of defensive tackles tend to do. There's a lot of upside. There's a lot of young, raw, gifted talent on this team, and the future is bright. So I'm all in all. Before talking this conversation, I probably would have said, yeah, I see him more like last year, 6-10, right in that ballpark, 5-11. After talking to you, I can see, because of the defensive moves, maybe 7-9, 8-8 isn't as far of a stretch as I think it is. Who knows?
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. I mean, we have made a lot of moves this offseason. Free agency, we were very active. I mean, shelled out a lot of money. Obviously, a ton of picks in the draft, made a couple trades. So if all the pieces do come together for Miami, it could be a great offseason in, retrospect when you look back on it. But as we all know, hindsight's 2020. You really never know until you're already past it. And sitting at this point right now, I can understand the skepticism. I could also understand where some people would be, very excited about the things that we've done. So Todd, thank you so much for stopping by. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show.
It's been my pleasure. Let's do it again sometime. This was a lot of fun.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Thank you.
You got it. Be well.
Guys, that's the video. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Did you like this style of video? Do you want to see a guy like Todd, or maybe even if I can get somebody else? Do you want to see more of this type of video on the channel? If you do, leave a big thumbs up. Also, comment down below and let me know what you think. So, guys, thank you so much. Please be sure to like and subscribe, hit that bell so that you know when we're putting out videos like this. Thanks a ton for watching, guys. Enjoy your night, and as always, fins up.